Okay. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting, April 20th. Peggy, can you give a roll call, please?
Mr. Goddickson,
Present.
Mr. Hartline,
Present.
and Mr. Martin won't be attending, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting?
So moved.
So moved. I assume we changed the date, right?
What's that? I did change. I did. It was only in the blurb part,
Yeah.
right? But it wasn't on the document. I'm looking at it going, what?
It's because we hit enter quick and we just do the autofills.
I had to copy it from an earlier one, and
Yeah,
that was my downfall. So thank you for catching that.
Yeah, so that was a good catch.
The approval of the minutes of that March 13th meeting.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. All right, moving right along. We'll jump right into the review of the financial statements and budget discussion. So we will jump through our building blocks and beliefs, our agenda, the financial update through March. Is that all the way on there? Through March 31st. As you can see, and as we've been discussing, right, the revenue seems to be really in trend in line with our annualized budget. You may recall there was a catch-up that we made note of at the February meeting, that the check was received in February but booked in March, so now it is now in line with that projection. I wish there was more something sexy to talk about, but it is fairly consistent, right? Our revenue stream, the real increase is in real estate taxes. Our interest revenue is ahead of schedule and is forecasted to exceed our budget by roughly $400,000. Other than that, there's a lot of back and forth on those other 511 taxes. So there's some that are trending above and some that are trending below. It's a narrow range that they're doing that in as we look at it right now. So we're sort of confident in that local number, short of the interest. And God knows where that's headed, right? There's so many different activities, right, in government that are moving bond rates in various demands, right? So they're up and down. With the market crashing as it was, people were moving to bonds, pushing the bond rates up. But that's, this is sort of day-to-day combat, more so than anything longer than that. The state revenue, as it shows, is ahead by roughly $328,000, largely in line with our plans. And the federal, the growth, as we've talked about in each of these meetings, is sort of the access funding and the ESSER closeout. We think that is in line with our plan, short of the ESSER closeout. So there'll probably be a positive variance to budget of maybe $600,000 when it's all said and done.
Is that why we're showing 109% versus?
Yes. Yep. Okay, and this is sort of the line item detail. And overall, the general fund year-to-date revenues are totaled $122 million, which is 3.1% more than we had received last year. Really, the increase is driven by local sources, 2.8 million. An increase in federal sources of 665. That's the ESSER piece, to your point, Mr. Goddickson. And the increase in state revenue coming on a bunch of those littler line items, as you can see, comparing the FY24 to the FY25 numbers.
When do you think the state will catch up with their additional 40%?
In terms of the difference, I'm sorry, yes. the state revenue will come in through late August, ultimately, right? So the final, what is typically the final check we get from them is the pension contribution. And that doesn't come until August, right? So when we look at some of these, it's important to realize sort of the calendar and when we recognize them. So they're, earned income tax, for example, right? We are collecting earned income tax for the months ending in June into July and in the beginning of August. So there is a tail, if you will. As this chart looks at it, you'll say, hey, we have taxes of we're only 40%, right? We're only 30%. Some of that is, it may be trailing our estimate, so we may be short. The other is that we recognize those earnings, that revenue, back into the year that it's accounted for. Okay?
Right.
Makes sense?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions? Comments?
Well, I mean, the only comment that I have is really, when you're looking at, we get all that local real estate tax, in the beginning of the year.
We do.
What would have happened if we were getting that as a rolling, payment instead of, getting the majority at the beginning of?
What would happen if you
Would-
got it throughout
would
the
we
course
be
of
in-
time?
yeah.
You would have less investment income, right? Because all the money comes in, 98% of the money, 95% of the money comes in up front in those first 3 months. This year it was delayed slightly because of the date got moved. So there's a slide that actually shows that today that I have, ironically enough. But, it would be, I'm not sure where else it would go, quite honestly, right? I'm not sure, you pick neighborhoods and you pay in September and you pay in October.
A through J
Right,
pays.
exactly. But it would be a detriment, right? And we just got today from PDE sort of the budget requirements that mandates that October or June 30th deadline to have a completed budget, requires us to then submit that to the state and to forward to the tax collectors the pertinent information, right? And, as we experienced last month, getting it done on the 26th delayed us 7 days into the next year, into this year, for that tax part to be caught up. So that delays when those due dates are done, right?
And when you look at the, 40 million from the state, if we could get that up front, it'd be great, but they're
Right,
doing the same thing we're doing.
Exactly, no doubt, no
Yep.
doubt. We've shown this slide again before as well, the top 10 sources of revenue. I did add those 2 columns to the left just to give some sense as to, are they always the same, right? So the February, that's its position in this top 10 list in February, and then the change in March. Obviously, the current real estate taxes, the overwhelming majority, right? The next closest is 10% of that number, right? Really demonstrates the reliance on real estate taxes. But you can then see the state's basic ed funding formula is next, was the same, right? So the top 2, there's no change. State share of retirement contributions is now moved up to number 3. Again, that's a timing one, and that's one that I mentioned comes the latest in the state funding. And you can kind of look down at the rest of them. Some move a space or two, and others, don't make it. So, okay.
It looks like we got a little bit more real estate transfer taxes than in March than we did in
We
February.
did, right? So there is a little more real estate transfer tax, right? And that is one of the 511 taxes that I think is going to be positive by a little bit compared to some of the other ones, right? So there's other taxes in that group that are actually behind schedule a little bit. But again, I think it's a pretty narrow range.
Are we seeing any trends with the earned income tax?
That one I think is dragging a little bit. If we go back real quick, earned income tax, we were at 4.2, right here, right? 4,186,196 through February last year, or through March last year, and we're now at 4,085. So we're, trailing by about, a little over $100,000, right? In that comparison, right? Our goal is to get to the 7.4. So
Or delinquents, is that some of the cases that we are currently have pending?
yes, so those are in collection, right? And that's another one that bleeds into the summer months
They don't run
in
fiscal.
collection,
Yeah.
as does earned income tax. And I think that we will, if I'm betting, I'm going to bet we're going to be short on that estimate. I think our current taxes remain strong and are consistent. And I think we'll be ahead on the real estate taxes in that 511 group. But I do think it's a fairly narrow, even when you look at the numbers compared to one another. Delinquent taxes, it's within $20,000 of where it was this time last year, right? $20,000 ahead. It's a fairly narrow range when we look at transfer tax, right? So that's the one that's the highest difference at this moment. We'll see if that continues. So there certainly could be some positive movement in that. And then the difference in the interest in investments, right? That's been a huge source of revenue for us over the past 2 years, right? There wasn't a time long ago that our whole number was $100,000, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was.
And when I joined, it was 700,000. It was $1 million one year, and I was like, wow, $1 million, that's pretty awesome. But it is really variable and tough to put our hats on, right? And I think it complicates some of the budget challenges when you're spending and confirming costs for the long term, when you really can't bank that number going forward.
Yeah, you need to be conservative on that.
So that's back to our chart. Any other questions? Any other feedback?
No, sir.
Looking at expenses, it's very similar to the story that we've been telling with regard to the general fund expenses, $98 million through March 2025, which is a $6 million increase, 6.3% more than the amount spent last year for this period, same period last year, really driven by purchase professional services, which is primarily the largest contributor there is the IU. That falls into that 300 group of expenses, increase in personnel and in benefits, or wrap up the final two, right? And I'm digging into those both as we work through the budget process and as we sort of align and forecast the rest of this year as we move forward. I think the supplies, we've talked about that in the past. Again, I think that number is gonna sort of hold between now and when we get to the end of the year, right? I think we have a lot of upfront expenses. I think we will go through this last quarter and possibly have a positive variance, but certainly within that range. Questions, thoughts?
Debt service will catch up.
What's that?
Debt
Yes,
service
yeah,
will
debt-
catch up
Debt
then too
service
as well,
always,
right?
yeah, that's a good one to point out, Mr. Harline, right? So we pay debt service in December and we pay debt service in June, right? So the debt service payments made in December include principal. The June payment is really just an interest payment, but that will certainly close that gap very quickly.
Have we started on that second bite at the apple for next year yet?
I've reached out to start those conversations.
Okay.
It's been a wacky, I'm sure you
Yeah.
guys are attuned to it as well, week.
Yeah.
In terms of markets, right? Up and down, and it almost becomes an obsession, right? Something that I rarely look at because I think my 401k plan and 403b plans that I have invested in for a long time. I can't control them. I can't use them. So I just, I try not to look at them because
you don't
it'll
wanna look
make
at
a
'em
bad
today.
day worse.
You don't want to look
Right?
at them today.
So, you know.
Not
double-
wiping out yesterday,
double down,
but still,
right?
yeah.
But yes, so the bottom line is the principal, you see we're in line there.
Right.
It's the difference between the interest on that debt service. So that's paid in June. But I will, I'll follow up with those guys and get a date on the calendar that we could begin those discussions and see if that's still how that lays out now, given the current economics. This slide shows sort of budget performance, whereas the blue is actual dollars and the orange is sort of a trended historical trends applied to our current year budget, if that makes sense. So it takes the budget both for revenue and expense and then says, okay, history says here at Centennial, you're going to get 80% of your real estate taxes in those first 2 months. Got it. So it creates that and it spits those numbers out. And the same for the expenses. To your point, Mr. Godekson, right? So history says that we would have had more real estate taxes here, right, than we did because of the delay, right? So every agency or every individual, and certainly the Tom Greenwoods of the world, if I was paying that tax, I pay it the day it's due or 2 days before it's due, and I lick the stamp and I put it in the mail.
And every mortgage company in
Right,
the country.
as do
Yep.
mortgage companies, right? So that creates sort of that difference in play, and you can see then the following month, it reverses,
That's why it
so,
looks so
right?
good in
So that's sort of
September.
what's going on. And that follows, for revenue, sort of follows it across where we're at, right? And you know, for what it amounts to, because we're comparing actual to the budget, it does show a consistency in where that revenue is applying across the bottom. On the bottom side, it's doing the same thing for expenses, right? You can see the tiered amount in December, it has a spike in expenses. That spike typically gets driven by an extra payroll that
It's the
occurs, right?
13-week
So
versus-
when you look at the trend window, if that third payroll is going to hit typically in December, that's what it leans to trying to figure out, right? So it's just sharing that number. And you know, short of those bounces, and then there could be, you know, sort of delays in when we actually paid it. So last year we were delayed in getting the IU bills caught up. You'll see some of that take into account too. But, you know, more times than not, you're looking at these months and the process is fairly consistent, right? They're here, they're there, right? So it is fairly becoming more and more predictable, if you will.
And then June is like the true up for the end of the year?
Yeah,
And
so
then
June
payrolls
has
and-
everything going on in it,
Right.
right? It has all catch-up payments, right? You're squeezed to make sure that people who are billing us in June, right? You look at the revenue, right? So we talk about the PA state, right? We're getting it in August, we pull it back into June. The earned income tax, we're getting it in July and August, we're pulling it back to June. On the payroll, on the expense side, you're paying out all of the contracts, right? So we accrue all of the contracts, whether you take the lump sum, if you will, and paid your final 3 payments in June, 3 or 4 payments, or you say, I want to be paid in the summertime, we have to accrue those back into the year because that's the contract window that we are paying from. So that really sort of jumps that number much more significantly, right? That's a huge number that we sort of track and manage too.
How does that work? I mean, this is just for my own edification. With new, like, so we hire a new teacher, a
Yes.
new FTE, and we hire them in August, then they're getting the summer pay. If they do the 12-year pay, that's then all getting accrued in June for their
So
new
a
July.
teacher that would be hired in August, right?
Right.
For the upcoming school year,
Mhm.
right, would not receive pay until
The
their
fall-
first
right.
pay,
Okay,
right? So which
that's-
is typically the end of August.
Right.
is when that would be made, right?
Okay.
And we take their contract and we divide it by the 26 pay periods that follow that circle, right?
Okay.
So they get paid, it's typically like the 25th-ish of August, when we come back to school. That's their first pay, and they would then count 26 pays, which would include the following year, right? Their contract runs from that August 25th-ish date until the June date, June 10th or June 13th, whenever school's over. That's teachers on a 10-month contract, right? But we pay them over a full year, over a 26 pay period year, and that's the calculation we do. So when you get to June, right, so I have 4 pays coming to me, 2 in July and 2 in August perhaps, right? Or 3, sometimes it's 2 in July, 1 in August, depending on where the paydays are landing. Those are either paid in June as a lump sum, or they are paid out like everybody else through that year. But from an accounting perspective, it differs, right? So my contract with the school ends in June. So my first check in July is July's expense, right? That same teacher who's sitting on the other side, that's a June expense because it's part of that contract. right?
That's kind of where I was getting at.
Yep.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Good question.
But their salary is running up through August though, right? You know, so
It is, but
technically a
we're
teacher is
accruing
running
for it, right?
September from,
Well, they're
What's that?
getting
So-
10 months of pay over 26 pay periods.
Correct, but we expense it in 10 months, in that June window, right? The catch-up happens in June, right? So that's why this number jumps, because we are catching up all of that, the teacher contract money that we have been dividing over that period of time into June. Good?
Thank you.
Right, so whether, if I'm paying the teacher in July or in August, I've already expensed it, so it's an accrual that is offset there. Good? So thanks for that question. It was a new chart. This was something new I was
Yeah.
looking at. I'm like, it's sort of interesting as we talk about budget performance and how close we actually run to the numbers. I thought it was interesting. And then, Mr. Godekson, when you said that, I'm like, look at that. We have a slide that actually shows the difference, like you read my mind.
Yeah.
Or you read the deck soon, which would have been appreciative as well. Next is sort of a discussion on the budget. As we've been discussing, we're evaluating the student special education services. We continue to have a positive variance in terms of numbers of students enrolled at the IU than what we had budgeted, which is a good thing, right? We are anticipating a refund because we expect to overpay. As you'll recall, that money will need to be brought back into June as well. We don't expect to get that final number until probably August timeframe, and that money will be due before the end of the calendar year. So we will then need to record that in our 24-25 school year, right? So that'll be a credit applied to it. Okay. As I've been back and forth in terms of presentations, as we look at it, I'm going to show that separately, that credit amount separately, so that originally I was looking at decreasing the expense inside of the IU. I think I'm going to pull it out and show it separately below the line so that we know this is actual to budget, this is where we're at, and that credit then will be shown as a separate line.
What are the anticipated budget for them for the 25-26 then?
We are working on that now.
Okay.
And expect to have by the beginning of next week
Prior to
their
our meeting.
latest forecast.
Okay.
Okay?
so with that credit coming in August, will that help the process of next year's budget?
What it'll do is it'll create a surplus in the current year, right? It'll create a surplus in the current year. What we do with those savings is up for the board to decide, right? But it will, like last year, we had an IU surplus, right? Or actually, we had a deficit, right? So we had a $930,000 debt to be paid. That was in the old style where the IU was carrying those credits forward, right? We committed the board committed to sort of make sure that we were going to take care of that with that surplus that we had last year. Okay, because we had a surplus in interest revenue, and I think that was the primary driver. Okay. The board president, as we shared in the weekly update, approved a limited agenda for our April 22nd meeting. We're going to try to stay as focused as we can in that meeting to budget items and to an update on where we stand with the budget. That'll include a much closer review of the two middle schools as well as the high school budget and the special education budget, which is a really key driver. I've talked to the special ed team, and my suggestions out of the gate were to make the numbers as direct as possible, and then to on the side calculate where we think we could have overages, right? Where we, instead of sort of putting them in, and as I think we talked about last month, putting a reserve in those bottom account numbers to account for it, sort of like our budget contingency, having a special ed contingency down within the collective contingencies, if you will. Not too much using the word contingency one too many times.
The
But what that'll
subdirectory to the
do
directory.
is that'll help us actually drive a lower charter school bill. If you're not familiar, charter school bills and charges that the charter schools get paid rely not on actual numbers, but on budgeted numbers, which is sort of a farce. I'm not sure how they wouldn't lag a year on your actual, or, to be able to determine what those expenses are. It is
Again, do an
totally
August
tied to your
catch-up.
budget.
Yeah, I say again, do a June or July catch-up.
Right.
Like everybody else.
Yeah, so it would be one that we could, if we need the reserve, instead of giving them credit for the reserve, keeping it a little tighter, and that should sort of manage those costs a little bit.
That would help us if the state comes through with a set fee for the charter schools.
The set
Or
fee
not.
for a charter school would help us, right? Would help every school, right? To be
I wouldn't
honest,
hold my
right?
breath on that.
I don't think it stands a chance,
Yeah.
right? I think we stand a chance of getting more money from the state than we do them and the charter schools, right? The charter school lobby is incredibly strong. 2 years ago, in the budget plan, they talked about making mandated audits a requirement, right? And that got taken out, right? They're not even audited. It's fascinating to me how that can be, right? Or at least they're not required to submit an audit, right? I worked at a charter school before. We ran 13 schools in PA, in Philly, and in Camden. We audited every year, right? We'd spend the summer, right? When I first took the job, I thought the summers were going to be light, right? We spent every summer
Well, that had to be
crunching
arduous. Yeah,
through
that had to be.
13 different audits of different school entities and combinations to get through that. As Dr. Bedden shared earlier this morning in an email, of all of the angst and the up and down over the past week since Liberation Day, I think it was called, the idea of tariffs and the impact to those charges, right, could be substantial, right? So we had two recent, we have the classroom projector quote, RFP went out. That quote was the winning bid that you'll see in next week is for $265,000, right? 28% on that would add $74,000 to that. And even more staggering is the Dell Chromebook that was approved at the March meeting, right? That's a $3.4 million lease agreement over 4 years, right? That would be an additional almost $1 million, right? That's 1%. That is over 1% tax increase to our communities, right? That is $1 million to the communities, right? That's we estimate it between 9 and 950. It almost is that same number. So the impact of tariffs are real, our ability to gauge the impact right now
Impossible.
is really, really.
It's impossible.
Is impossible,
It's
right?
impossible. There's so much,
You know, and whatever the current is, the current reprieve was 90 days.
we have no
But
control
it isn't
over it.
on China, right? It
But
isn't on China. So
I
to the
just say-
extent that the
And
Dell
that's where that
computers.
comes
A lot,
from,
a lot of the
Right?
Dells come from Mexico, so that's, that's the 25%,
Right.
but
We will see, right? We did hear from two of the four, I think it was three or four people that bid on the projectors. One who was a losing bid did call to let us know that that number wouldn't hold up because of the tariffs. The second one, who actually had the winning bid, as shared in Dr. Ben's email that I sent him today, or sent to the cabinet today, that guy called and said, how quickly will I know that I'm going to get the bid? Because if I know soon enough, I'll start hoarding projectors.
and that's what I'm
right?
wondering with Dell, because we already approved Dell for that amount. We
Right.
may be locked in, and they may have already,
Right. That
processed
one's
it,
a
so
little
we
more
might be
complicated,
okay.
but we will see if we can't chase
Yeah.
them down, right? But that is, they've got to be able to sort of get them on the sidelines, right? So I appreciated appreciated both letting me know,
Yeah.
and one saying, you know what, I will try my best to identify that equipment that's currently in country and be able to go from there.
yeah, I mean, I would hope that with Dell, that they would eat the difference, considering the number of school contracts they have, and they will eventually make it up on the back end. Everybody knows that, but
We'll see, right?
We'll see.
I mean, at
good to
least
be
a
king.
portion of it, right?
I say it's good to be the
extent that
king.
They can, right?
So-
To the extent that they can.
yeah.
And I sort of, I wrote it, took it out, wrote it, took it out, wrote it, took it out. Really am concerned on the board's ability to fully appreciate where the district stands and the drivers to how we got to where we are. And I'm not feeling or sensing the willingness, and I understand the political reality that we work in, but the long-term planning is really a critical component to successful school business and successful management of the district finances, for which the board is one that's clearly responsible for. I'm working, so I ended up putting the bullet back in, and it is just, to the extent that the finance committee can share insights in helping those process, helping the budget process, I would certainly appreciate it. I think it is really critical that we do focus on the long-term plan and sort of call out the compensation agreements is one that is really, if we're not thinking long-term when we deal with compensation agreements, we're really short-sighted, because while there's a lot of expenses, the overwhelming majority of those expenses live in people.
I would leave this in for our discussion on the 22nd.
Okay. So I will do that. We will be, as following Tuesday's meeting, Dr. Wilson and I will be working to review the Act 93 agreement. We actually I hope to have something out tomorrow at the latest, just beginning our questions, since we weren't involved in the negotiation. We'll be sending those questions out to the full board to understand what their thoughts are on the different aspects of that, right? There's sort of wording questions that we question, as well as what is included or assumed that isn't written in paper, that was discussed between the bargaining group and the negotiating team and the Act 93 team.
Yeah, it needs to be codified
negotiators,
before
right.
we vote on it, so.
Yep. So these two slides are ones that you've seen before. The one on the left, we shared last May as part of our board presentation that really looked at the impact of the increases and assumed a 3% for the support and a 3% to the admin team, right? So it sort of took the value of that and compares it against the Act 1. A full Act 1 is the top, and then if you the Act 1 less a 0.5%, Act 1 less a full percent. and it shows you how much of the Act One is being used up, right? So, in each one of these, this is the cost with the full Act One. So by 2028, the full Act One increase projected is used up in salary compensation by itself, right? And then what happens if you take a half a point less than the full, right? Goes from here to here, and now we're negative right away, right? And a full increase, by the end, by 2028, you're $1 million, spending $1 million more than you're taking in your leading source of revenue, right? So that was shared last May, and this more recently, trying to sort of simplify it, looking at where we stand year to year. The blue is the teacher contract, just the increase in the teacher contract. This is the support, the orange is the support staff and the Act 93 at 1%, which is the current contracted number, and then at 3%. So really this is the 3%, this is just 2 added on top of it, right? And it shows where you stand against the Act 1. So you're less than the full Act 1 in 2 years from now, right? You're sort of right at it next year. You're right, 2 years later, you're in it, right? If you're a point below, which has been our MO, you're not paying for the teacher contract with the additional money that you're raising. So that view and sort of that long-range impact, I think, is really a critical piece of any of these negotiations and any of these discussions that we need to be having. Make sense? Any thought, any feedback? I will, to your comment, Mr. Harline, I will include that both bullet points. The 93 agreement, we expect to have have some summary of our initial feedback to keep that moving forward out to the full board this week. Okay?
Thank you.
The last slide on the projection side, on the budget side, is you've seen in our weekly updates. So the last 2 weekly updates, and I hope I didn't cause anyone I spoke to one board member and took it sort of personally, and then this idea wasn't meant to be a personal attack. It's meant to just really help everyone understand what we control and what we don't control, right? And it's really sort of that black and white, right? Everyone, it's easy, not easy, but easier to compare businesses as the same, right? So this sort of store over here is similar, right? And if I have lower sales, I've got to reduce this, that, and the other thing, right? If my sales are down 10%, I need to reduce expenses 10% in order to have that same margin. Very simple. In school business, we have mandates, right? And there is a lengthy document that we have shared in the past. I know Dr. Ben has it on his quick release. You can have that thing, in your email box in within 2 seconds, right? He has it saved somewhere, and that you'll get it. But those mandates really grow, right? What the slide looked at showing was what those mandates are, right? Which is this slide, right? Mandates going back to 2017 to 2026, right? So a 10-year view of those mandates, right? Those mandates include special education costs, right? Those include charter school tuitions. They include pension contributions, right? And debt service. That's all I've defined within that group. And you can see how those numbers have grown, right? That is growing faster than the rate of inflation. It is growing faster than all of the other expenses, right? When we look at all of the expenses the district has shown, and I shared this in the weekly update, right? Our expenses are growing at 2-ish%. Mandate expenses are growing at 5% a year in that 10-year window, and the CPI is at 3%, right? So every other expense category is growing at a rate much less than inflation. And further below, right, almost half of the rate that is for these uncontrollable, less controllable costs, right? So, you know, tried to show the graph piece and showing the percent of the budget, right? So these expenses, obviously, right, because all the other expenses are growing at a smaller pace, these are growing at a larger percent of our budget, right? This is 44% of our budget is captured in these. 10 years ago, right, that number was 38, right? Right? So it is a growing piece of that pie, of that dollar bill is going to cost that while the board has control of all the money, it is still outside of their control. You can't say, I'm not going to contribute to pension, right? We can't hire employees and not pay them for the pension. It really looks at that. So that's sort of the top looks at the budget, the uncontrollable piece, and then the controllable piece. To the graph, then to this chart up here. So this chart says, I'm taking all of these out, right? I'm left with this. So the pension that's a part of payroll benefits is not in this number because it's a part of here, right? So I've sort of dissected all of those components and separated them out. And then roughly, you know, sort of in quotes, these are sort of departments. Some are clearer reflections of a department, like the business office is clearly a department, right? Regular education has a lot of components to it. So it is sort of not necessarily a department, but I think for comparison and discussion's sake, we can call it what it is, right? Those are defined by the function codes that are part of PDE's chart of accounts, right? Operations, support services, operations, transportation. This is technical services, student activities, and other. And the pieces of those, right? So this is the salary component of that. So of the $87,000, 87 million. 58 million is salaries, 13 million are benefits. The all other bucket is $15 million. That includes contracts, the IU, all of those kind of things.
That's what they were.
Right? Most of the IU though will actually be on the other side because it's special education. To make that.
So is the retirement in on the salary, or is that, you know, standing alone somewhere?
The pension?
Yeah.
The pension is in our uncontrollable because we don't.
Yeah, I know,
control it, right?
yeah.
So it's a part of this orange bucket, right? It's not, it typically is found under benefits, but because I was separating the two, I pulled it out of regular education benefits. So that this is the overall benefit number. If we looked at our pie chart from earlier, hey, it's a bigger number. This excludes the pension in that benefit category.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, I mean, it is operations, transportation, and support staff are the things that we spend percentage-wise the most out.
Yep. Right, and those are things that, you know, and while we say it, it's just sort of tongue-in-cheek, right? These are, you know, non-mandated, but, you know, if we're not regular education, we're sort of out of business,
Yeah,
right?
it's man, yeah.
So those are the biggest, right? So if I sort of drop down, right, if you have a $155 million budget, if you deduct the mandated costs, you're at $87 million, right? If I evenly distribute a budget deduction across that group, right, I would need the budget reduction would need to be that 36%, right, across all the groups, right? If I take regular education out of that math because it's what we do, right, right, everyone else would need to contribute 12%, right? If I said, okay, the salary and benefits stay, what percent of all other expenses do I need to get to that $1 million? That number is 35%, right? 35% of all other expenses out of that column to make up for that deficit in the budget.
So the stuff that we outsource, for lack of a better term, obviously we're paying for their increase in expenditures plus their profit margin. They're going to make a profit. The things that we can bring back in-house, so we look at our transportation, our operations, our support service staff, those things that we can bring back in-house that we have a better control over because we only have a 2% general increase.
Our transportation is in-house.
Well, no, Michelle, I'm looking at the transportation for the all other expenditures, and I'm assuming that's like IU transportation services, special those.
It's also gas.
Okay.
It's diesel.
All right, okay,
It's
so,
parts and pieces.
okay.
right?
Because I would think
This is
gasoline would be a
this is
huge part of that.
everything in the transportation line.
All right.
Isn't people and isn't benefits.
What would then be in student services, support service?
And here?
Yes,
This is tech, so this would typically be technology leases and
Okay.
expenses that we have.
Okay.
Would be in that category,
all right.
But not people.
not people.
But no,
People
that's
are
external of all
here,
people. Okay,
Right, salaries, benefits for those people, and then all other expenses. So I've tried to capture it in sort of the most simplest of terms, right? So we talk about people, talk about other expenses.
got
Right,
it.
so, within the business office, right, a piece of this could be, and I'm not sure if it is insurance, right? So our insurance that we pay $500,000 in insurance to cover us for varying liabilities, right? That's in this other expense. I believe it's in the business office, but, you know, that would be here. We can't really do without it, right? So even within the mandated, you could take a fine tooth comb and say, you know what? You know,
Yeah, well,
without
yeah, you
school
need
board
E&O.
insurance,
You need
you guys
E&O,
aren't
you
showing up,
need-
right?
yeah, exactly.
So while, you know, without gasoline, without diesel,
Yeah.
without propane, the transportation group isn't much of a
And
transportation.
they have gone up substantially in the last,
Exactly.
I say, and that's the other thing too, is the things that hit us harder are things that have gone up more, like fuel oil, like heating, electricity, those things, have hit us harder. What is in the other group, the 5,900 group, or 5,300?
This is the contingency that was
As
included
contingency,
as part of the
gotcha.
budget.
Okay.
Right out of the gate, right?
Right.
So spent a lot of time trying to back and forth between the mandated pieces and everything else, and really wanted to tie to the penny where we ended up in terms of what that budget was, right? So I went back to the current year, the projected budget that's out there now, right? That is certainly due to change a little bit, but it was the most realistic, and it was within the 10-year window. So
And I know that last month we had talked about it, that we were within that variance for, estimated expenditures and everything last month, so.
Right.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions on this? And again, really, it was just trying to answer that question of, hey, can you apply a flat rate across all areas? And you truly can't.
can't.
We can try to target it. And then what is really, the other piece is what is really defined by mandated costs, right? Transportation, as Dr. Bedden shared, is really only required for special education students, and some students, depending on where they live, could require transportation. It's not a blanket. Not everyone is due transportation, but that would certainly create chaos and havoc if we said, you know what, we're going to do without transportation now. Student activities, the same run of the mill, right? Yeah. Those carry large family movements to make sure that we're providing those opportunities, right? Operations, which is more our custodial and maintenance teams, right? We spend a lot of time making sure our buildings are warm, safe, dry, and clean. Those are all components of that.
May I make a suggestion?
Sure.
To add, like the breakdowns that you had talked about under the others, just put a line in saying, other items could include things such as fuel oil, maintenance, grass seed, strip, whatever the solvent stripper to do the gymnasium floors, custodial supplies, so that we all have an idea of what's broken, what could be inside that other
Sure.
group.
I'll try to take a,
Yeah,
sort of-
some,
I'll draw a line in the sand, right? We'll try to figure out the big numbers
Don't go,
included in there, right?
don't go crazy
So
on it,
I'll
but
take seating out, but
Yeah.
I'll make sure that we include,
Blacktop
electric
repaving.
bills,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
The gas bill, which is important, the water bill, which is important,
yeah.
fuel for transportation, tax.
Yeah, those of us that read the
insurance
bill list,
bills,
we
right,
see that,
That are
yeah.
real,
Yeah.
and you really don't, so I will add that to that column. That's a great suggestion.
Thank you. Yeah, those of us that read the bill list see those, the pool, the monthly pool testing and air quality check.
Yep, we're full of them, right? We're full of
All
expenses.
things that have to be done.
Yep,
Yep. And they're for the safety of the students, so
so,
that's it.
any questions on those?
Nope.
If not, for information, we will have the monthly reports from PSDLEF as well as some analytics. We have two items that are going to be presented for board approval. The one is our postage machine lease, which is coming due. We only had one responder. The current vendor, called back and said, I'm sorry, I missed the date, but unfortunately we were where we were. And the one responder was less than the current, fractionally. It's not a whole lot of money in postage meter leasing anymore. But it was less than what we're paying now, so we said that's wonderful. The second one is for $163,000 for ovens for use at the high school, McDonald and Willowdale. They're sort of double-stacked ovens that they use within the food
Does that
service
mean
group.
that we pretty much have replaced, or will be replacing everything in the kitchen at the high school? That sounds like an awful lot of
I
stuff.
think it's a rolling basis.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there is, right? And I think, so it comes in different shifts in time. So yes, so we just approved refrigeration and freezer units, right? That
Yeah.
we have a large built-in freezer at the high school, but we also have smaller units that we can roll things into and out of between lunch cycles, right? And we have those for refrigeration. We have roll-in ovens that they can also roll in. So everything's on a tray. They just roll that tray into this, stand-up oven, if you will, right? It's as tall as you are, Mr. Godikson, right? And they can put that tray in and shut the door, wait for the next group to show up. And there's much more in there than these.
I mean, it's all good, but this is also coming out of the food service.
It is
okay?
100% food service fund.
So,
Let's
do
make
we
a
have
note of
that
that.
much
Yep.
more money available in the food service that we can pay for all of this?
We have too much money,
Okay.
as we started the conversation today around, right? We have, in some extent, too much money in food service,
Food
right?
services is more of a true business model.
It runs, it does, right? It's a proprietary business fund, right? The accounting, as we talked about in the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the school would expense this and it would go against the money raised, right? It's not how they account for it for food service, right? They account for food service like it's a business. So it does not apply, it doesn't expense these because these are capital items, just as it wouldn't expense it if it was a standalone cafe, restaurant, right? You would have to depreciate that expense over a period of time to calculate your earnings. That doesn't happen. It's not a good use, right? Because they squeeze you on what you can then, the amount of money you're allowed to carry. And we've pushed back. I've pushed back every year since I've been here. I know Mr. Burdnick did as well. I've read some of his notes and his commentary as they looked at costs that they really can't control. And hey, we know these other costs are coming down. And if you really want to treat me like a standalone business, right, you need to account for the liability that I have on my pension, right?
Yep.
So there's a large gap financial that includes the liability, that pension liability going forward. So it's a little messy. We've been where we are at. I think we're in a good place. I think Lori does a phenomenal job. Shannon before her did a very good job, but they managed that kitchen extremely well. And it is 100% separate from anything in the general fund as well as in the district's capital fund, right? It runs and stands alone by itself. It does include that on the documents that are included in that. I can spell it out and add it to the comment section to say it one more time. But I know I sort of put it in there as bold. It's a Fund 50 expense.
Now, as I asked on Tuesday, is there any fear that we can be losing funding for the food service? Due to the federal government
I think there
and
is fear. I
agriculture?
think there's fear, quite honestly, that we could lose funding for anything, right? I mean, it's very difficult to understand, at least currently, because the track record is sort of all over the place, right? That we could lose funding if you sign or don't sign a state agreement, right? You know,
Yeah.
that came out yesterday. Dr. Ben shared that, right? I don't know if that can really happen, right? They have pooled ESSER funding for schools that didn't spend it fast enough, right? So people who had agreements to carry over their ESSER money found out in a day, March 28th, a letter came out and said, if you were planning to carry it forward, you're no longer allowed to do that. Done.
How much do we get from the state for food services? Because doesn't the state do, isn't there something with the, I don't want to call it No Child Left Behind, but it was the No Child Goes Hungry or
yep.
something, I forget
No,
the exact name.
the state pays a decent amount of food service, right? I know they
Right.
pay for all of the free breakfast, right?
Right, that's
So
what I'm saying, the free breakfast and free lunch, right.
They pay for, right? They have a share in that, mandates around making sure everyone gets fed, right?
I say, yeah, because they were talking about making it all students eligible, nothing, but we're
Right.
not throwing any money in to do it.
Right,
So,
right.
you know, that was
So-
another mandate that
Yep.
is sitting in the
Right.
300 or 400 bills that are in committee right now.
I will,
Yeah.
I will pull out, I'll ask Lori for that, and I'll try to include it in tomorrow's update.
I mean, we
But what
can't-
percent of the food service is actually federal money versus state money? I can look that up really quick.
Would be good.
Do we, I mean, so, and you know, I think I already know the answer to this, but, so food services is kind of its own separate entity.
Yep.
Do we bill them for their kitchen space as a percentage of building footprint?
We don't, right? We don't. It gets very, there's some fine lines
That's what I'm wondering, okay.
around what is their space versus our space, right?
Right.
Theirs is truly defined by the cooking area.
Mm-hmm.
We don't charge that. You probably could. It would be somewhat difficult, but we do charge them. This year, we began charging them sort of a maintenance fee for
Okay.
cleaning and for costs that are outside of what they currently have.
Where does the monitors, fall into? Are they under the district? or
That's our
not under the
expense.
food-
That's
not
a
under
district
food
expense,
district.
right? They pay for the cooks and the service team, right? The food service monitors that are patrolling lunchrooms and patrolling playgrounds are a district expense.
So the 163,000.
Yep.
164,000. I noticed on the bid that it had installation equipment and stuff, but that also includes the physical installation
Yes,
and removal?
yes.
Okay, or at least on,
Yep.
okay. Yeah, I know when you're starting to deal with gas and those
Sure.
types of things, my general rule is if it can burn my house down or blow it up, I don't do it myself.
Well,
So,
thankfully, we have hired guns, right?
yeah, I know we
that are
have
much,
some
much
very
brighter about that
talented
than,
people.
I'm not, at least than me. I won't speak for yourself, right? But, our maintenance team,
They're outstanding.
as Mr. Godekson has asked several times, really does an outstanding
they're
job, right?
great.
So we are replacing hot water heaters, we're replacing coolers, we're building in, installing.
know these can be kind of
various things,
special.
right? Classroom space, expanding classroom space with the team we have on board. I think within this, it is, sort of to get it in place and get it done. It's in that part of that agreement, as you
Okay.
pointed out.
All right. You're looking for a motion to move these two
Okay.
items ahead?
Yes,
So moved.
I'll second that.
thank you very much. You guys make a heck of a team. All right,
This
So-
doesn't cost us anything.
Well,
and those are the easier ones, right?
yes. All right, next
So that's
meeting
it.
is
Any
10th,
questions, any
15th.
feedback?
No,
I will take the breakdown of what's in the other expenses as a to-do.
Okay.
I'll provide the feedback on food service, the impact of state and federal, and
you'll have a,
what happens to the used equipment.
One of the things that, because we're talking budget on Tuesday, is to really take out the, pension contributions too, so that it's clear, how much that is, to the rest of the board, because that's a sizable amount of money.
No,
I
yeah,
know
and,
it's-
and again, that was the purpose of this,
Yeah.
right? So I can sort of put the math in, right? But you're right, pension contribution is 34% of everyone's salary, right? You don't really have to say so, right? That's this orange block, right? And how that has grown over that 10-year window of time, right? It's starting to grow less, but it's still growing year over year.
And quite frankly, who knows with the way the market is and investments are this year, what they're gonna come out with for next year. It could be anything.
Is it amazingly, not to get in someone else's business, but it is an amazingly poorly run pension plan, right? When you could get rid of everybody in Harrisburg that deals with the pension and put all our pension money into an S&P 500 index fund, you'd save those hundreds of thousands of dollars you pay for those people, and you would still your return would be better, right?
I actually
Last
tried-
year, when they came and they charged all of the employees an extra contribution because our rate was less than, 8%. The S&P index was 15 over that window of time, and they couldn't get 8. It is amazing how poorly run that is.
I actually,
But again, that's politics, I think.
the previous time I was on the board, I actually ran for the statewide seat for that board to try to get on it because it was just,
Really,
horrible.
really amazing.
yes.
Real
And even with the hybrid that they've put into place, it's still not, their ROIs are horrible.
Right, the hybrid is a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
So
It's gonna take 30 years for it to work in.
Right, the part that they control is gonna be terrible, and the part that
Yeah.
the employee is only, their percentage is only their contribution in, right? So it's their 8% or 9%.
I was gonna say less than 10% or
right?
whatever, yeah.
It isn't the lion's share. The lion's share goes back into the mothership to be distributed, right? So it's a quasi 403B and defined pension plan together.
I think Ponzi scheme came to mind at one point. Not that I'm saying that,
Right?
not
I mean,
that I'm, please understand it's a
History will
joke.
tell us, right, that there was a run on that money at some
Yes.
point in time, right?
Yes.
That people dipped in and borrowed from it.
Well, I say at some point in time too, the number of retirees is going to eclipse individuals paying in also, and it could,
Sure.
there could have to be, I mean, I know that the actuaries, the last time they did the actuaries, I was talking to one of our state senators, and yeah, he was like, no, the numbers look good. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at it, it's Centennial in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
Centennial has been a good place to work for a long time. And, we have good schools and, to show for it. But we have a very tenured staff.
Yes.
Right? You look at the number of people who are in those later ranges, right? And they're all still relatively young folks, right? So, they could, 30 years or 35 years, right? I'm 50, right? I'm 55, I'm 60 years old. I can retire, right? I can get another job, right? I can, my goal would be to, cut grass on some nice country club and play on Mondays, right?
Let me run the lawnmower
right?
and I'll play for free.
I don't want anything complicated, right?
Like a lot of other people cross the border. I mean,
Right.
you're not that far. I mean,
Yeah.
you're close
No,
to
you
Delaware,
could-
we're
you could
close to New
create
Jersey.
another one. No, that's
Yeah.
a trend as
Still
well.
have a pension, that's a trend.
That is a
That's
trend
definitely
as
a
well.
trend.
Well, I mean, it's really the same too as a lot of individuals that did 20 in the military, 25 in the military, come out, do a civil service job as well, and
Sure.
I mean, absolutely,
No,
and that's,
that is
God
what it
bless
is,
them.
right?
I mean, that's,
and teachers have been doing it for that long.
Yeah.
God bless them, right?
But what
Which
I'm
is
look-
unique when we talk to Anthony, you talk about professional development, right? And just sort of frame of mind, right? If I started teaching when I got out of college in '88, right? World was completely different. Tools at place were really different, right? The need for professional development in education is as much a need as it is for accountants or other business folks, because business changes, right? And the way you teach math in 1988, right, is different than the way we teach math in 2028, right?
Every profession does continuing ed, whether it's fire services, emergency services, teachers, doctors,
Sure.
nurses. I mean,
Yep.
yeah, in the computer business, everything changes every 6 months. You're relearning
Right.
something new.
No, absolutely, absolutely,
I mean, AI was a blink 3 years ago.
right.
But what I'm looking for, Tom, is, you have the salaries, you have the benefits. I would almost like to see the pensions, separated out of those
Within
two.
this category,
Within the salary and benefits group.
Yeah,
it's not included in here.
but that's why
If you could add another column that is
Column
just
that
what we pay
shows
for
the-
pensions.
pensions, because
Okay, but again.
You're just seeing
So
it.
we're clear, right? Pensions aren't in this
Yeah.
column, right? This column is healthcare
Mm-hmm.
and some.
But it's not in the salary category either.
What?
You were
It's
done.
in the, it's in the mandated category, right? So the total expense is 155 million, right? It includes uncontrollable.
Correct.
Which includes all of the pension.
I see it down there, but I would like to see it up there, as a separate separate line as well.
I'll
You know,
see,
if
I'll
you
put
can
it on
do
the
that.
side, but it's not a part of
Yeah.
the controllable piece, right? It's not in this total,
If,
right? Because we don't control it, right? So I separated out, like I did for special education, right? So this doesn't include salaries for special ed teachers because they're over here.
how about, will this do it, Fleming? If next to the blue, you put the dollar amount, next to the green, you put the
Well,
dollar
maybe
amount?
That's what
You
we
can
need
certainly
then.
put these dollars in.
Okay,
Absolutely,
that's
right?
what,
I can
because
show them
Right.
down here.
the
Yeah, if you put
graph
the dollar-
doesn't
yeah, put the
really
dollar
give a
amount.
good
Absolutely.
point,
No, right, so if we're not catching it on the line, which is reasonable.
Yeah.
Right, I can put the value in each of those boxes, so you can tell to that point, that's
I think that might be
got it.
helpful.
That would be very helpful.
Yeah, that's a
Got it.
lot more visual
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
and I think, yeah, thank you. Yeah, because
So
that
add
should
dollar
suffice.
value to the mandated
The
graph.
Yeah, and I would think just for, the upcoming year, I don't necessarily know that unless you want to do a
You could
two-year
do it to the beginning, I
comparison.
could do it on either end, right? So
Yeah.
We're comparing the
What
growth
it
here
was
from
back-
42 million to 68 million in 10 years, right? I can show them here and show what those numbers look like there.
I think.
Yeah,
That
especially
would
if
be
you look
very
at,
helpful, because I think things like
Yeah.
special education, right? Special education, it could nearly have doubled
yeah,
Well,
in terms of that bottom gray line.
yeah, I
right?
was looking at, other purchase services too, it's like that is significantly larger,
Sure,
so,
sure.
okay,
All right?
all right.
Thank you.
That's great feedback. I appreciate
Right.
that.
Anything else?
Not that I have. I think that
With
is,
everything? The next
takes us
meeting
to our
is the
agenda. Our
15th?
next meeting is
May 15th.
is the
15th?
15th of May.
Yes,
My goodness. In the final quarter of the school year.
I know.
Yikes.
We have 6 weeks of school left,
Something
something
like
like
that.
that,
Something
6 or
like that,
7.
Right? We have
Countdown, and then we have spring break in there
we
too,
have
so.
spring break next week. We're off closed Thursday, Friday, and Monday this year. That should
And
be
it's
nice.
a
So
run to
happy
Memorial
Spring
Day.
break for everybody.
Hopefully it'll be spring-like.
Yes, we'll take that, right? I don't know. I hope it is. I hope it is. All right, then we'll have a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right.
All
All
right.
righty, then. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.